So my name's Matt Johnson, and I'm based at the European Work and Employment Research Centre, and I work with Professor Damien Grimshaw. And this presentation draws on an analysis of secondary data on pay in the labour market in Greater Manchester, which Damien and I worked on, along with a brief case study of the work programme in Greater Manchester also. And both of these strands of analysis, I think, intertwine with a lot of the issues that are being discussed today and are posing questions about what kind of economic recovery we're supposedly experiencing, the best way to address problems in the labour market, and what devolution will mean for Greater Manchester. And hopefully it'll link quite nicely with Naomi Clayton's talk a little later on about unequal cities. So we're often told that there's a jobs-led recovery underway, and the government has made quite clear that they see getting people into work, welfare to work schemes as a kind of underpinning plank of the economic recovery. And there's something of a paradox in that post-industrial regional economies such as Greater Manchester potentially stand to benefit quite significantly from moving people into work and growth in jobs and the economy. But the way in which the labour market is performing means that the regional economies are still kind of bumping along the bottom, really. So there's a lot of competition at the bottom of the labour market, which, as Damien will discuss in a short while, can act as a drag on wages, and it means there are relatively few incentives for employers to invest in upgrading and upskilling. So that's kind of some of the contextual stuff around the work programme, really. So looking at the first slide, we can see that, probably no surprise to anybody, there's a long way to go in terms of getting people into work across Greater Manchester. So the rate of unemployment remains comparatively high relative to the North West region and Great Britain overall. And although areas such as, again unsurprisingly, Stockport and Tameside compare reasonably well with regional and national averages, there are still worryingly high rates of unemployment in areas such as Manchester and Oldham. So some of the kind of most densely populated areas still got very, very high structural unemployment. And if we focus on kind of a disaggregation by gender, we can see that whilst unemployment rates for men and women across Greater Manchester as a whole are broadly equal, there are still pockets of gendered unemployment within Greater Manchester. So whereas men are at higher risk of unemployment in areas such as Bury, Stockport, Wigan, the situation is completely reversed in places such as Manchester and Oldham, where women are much more likely to be unemployed. So you can see the two circles in the middle of the graph there. Female unemployment is markedly higher in Manchester and Oldham, and almost double that of places like Stockport and Wigan. So there's some major discrepancies in the way in which the labour market is working for different people. So against that background, there's certainly scope for the work programme to have an impact. So for the case study research, we spoke to participants who were on the work programme, but were actually attending a job club, which is based in the city centre, run by a voluntary sector organisation. I won't say who they are, but they were doing an absolutely incredible job with working with people with very complex and often overlapping needs, such as a history of mental health problems, substance misuse, offending behaviour. So a very, very challenging client group, if you like. And these were people who found the work programme very stressful experience. They were under a lot of pressure to meet job search targets, even though they were obviously quite a long way from the labour market. So in terms of the work programme itself, how it's structured, so it's built on a payment by results system. So there's large private sector contractors such as Capita, G4S, CTEC, so on, and they're paid to undertake the kind of high volume elements of the work programme, so helping clients with job searches, brokerage with employers, helping to prepare CVs and practice interviews, so the kind of the functional transactional elements of the work programme. But they also in turn manage a supply chain who deliver interventions to help people become work ready, whatever that means. So, and this system overall is kind of managed, if you like, coordinated by Job Centre Plus, which is part of the DWP. And it used to be managed wholly by Job Centre Plus with their own contractors, but most of it's now moved over to the private sector contractors. And in terms of outcomes of the work programme, it appears that unemployment is coming down from what was a relatively high starting rate, particularly in Manchester local authority area. But how much of this is due to the work programme is probably open to debate. So job placement outcomes as a result of the work programme kind of improved steadily but appear to be tailing off, and that's despite the fact that the underlying economy has continued to grow. So it's slightly worrying that the work programme isn't able to match people with work in the same proportions as the labour market is recovering. And some areas such as Bury and Wigan have seen very, very slow growth in successful job placement. So there's huge disparities in how well the work programme is doing for different areas within Greater Manchester. And outcomes for specific outcomes for specific groups, specific client groups vary widely as well. So, for example, within Greater Manchester, those transitioned from various disability benefits, so the government's tried to rationalise some of the disability payments that it used to have, and people released from prison, they're very, very unlikely to be placed in a successful job outcome as a result of the work programme. And there's some minor differences in placement outcomes for men and women as well. So job placement outcomes for women tail off significantly after the age of 25, which potentially reflects some underlying discrimination in the labour market and how women are supported to return to work from childbirth. So there's some issues there in terms of how different groups fare. So generally speaking, the work first model of the work programme is creating a bit of a risk of a poor fit between work and workers. So it puts pressure on clients on the work programme to apply for any available work that is going there, encouraged to search for and apply and go to interviews for anything that's going, basically. And high levels of competition for work at the bottom of the labour market means that even relatively skilled workers are being channelled into quite low wage, low prospects work. So previous work experience and skills don't necessarily count for a great deal, particularly for older workers who are competing with graduates, who are competing with people applying for apprenticeships. There's a lot of incentives for employers to take on younger workers than there are older workers, so they're all kind of lumped into one pot at the bottom, really. And there is an animation. It was kind of beyond my technical skills to get it actually embedded in the slides, but there is an animation which kind of complements the others on the problems of this kind of one-size-fits-all approach. I think there are links to that available. Generally speaking, it's perhaps fair to say that incentives on the work programmes are much more stick than they are carrot. So the contractors agree a package of interventions and support which clients are expected to keep to, and if they don't, they are obliged then to notify the DWP that these appointments have been missed, and in certain circumstances, benefits can then be withdrawn as a kind of sanction or a penalty. And the administrative burden of the work programme is really quite difficult for some of those people with the most complex needs who might lead quite chaotic lives, so keeping to regular appointments can be quite difficult. And the problem of the sanctions is probably quite nicely underlined by the fact that the DWP has had to invent fictitious clients which show how successful the sanction system has been for their own publications. So there's a definite issue there with the way in which the sanctions work. And from our case study work, it was immediately obvious that the job clubs are fulfilling a really important function in bridging the gap between the formal requirements of the work programme, so what the government wants people to do, and people's actual individual needs. So job clubs are generally coordinated by the local authority, but they might actually be run by charitable or voluntary sector organisations. So they're not necessarily formally part of the work programme, but they offer a kind of a safe space, if you like, for people who are returning to work or maybe entering work in the first time with complex needs to kind of build their confidence at their own pace without being kind of rushed into work too quickly. And from the people we spoke to, the difference between the kind of formal side of the work programme and what the job clubs offers was pretty stark. So one of the mentors at the job club told us that they just didn't want to be part of the work programme officially. They were happy to remain kind of outside of that arrangement because it meant that they could do that kind of in-depth, tailored work that meant people had a better chance of getting into and sustaining work in the long term. And they felt that the profit motive for the private sector prime contractors was a major conflict of interest. And that was kind of reflected in the clients' views as well. They much preferred this kind of safe and supportive environment rather than the formality and the kind of production line system of the work programme. So needless to say, yeah, they're kind of picking up some of the shortfall that the work programme is struggling to do. So I'll pass over now to Damien to talk about jobs and wages.